Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm thrilled to be back to talk some Terps, especially coming off back-to-back home victories. First, a 79-61 win over UCLA on Friday night, and then last night, the Terps have another home game. They beat Minnesota 77-71 as they even up that Big Ten record at 3-3 and really get set now for this stretch run. 14 games left, they're at 500, and that's really what's going to determine this season is what happens over these next 14 games. So a ton to talk about between those two victories. But first, a reminder, if you're listening to this show, but you'll want to be watching it, then you gotta go and check us out on YouTube, because on YouTube, this show's part of the Department of Hoops, a DMV media network. We have tons of great coverage there of the Terps with this show, of the Wizards, of other local college hoops. If you love local basketball, then you're going to love the Department of Hoops. So check it out, youtube.com/@Department of Hoops. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like buttons, leave a comment on this show, on all the shows, because there's just a ton of great stuff going on. And if you like this show, you got to go and check it out. So let's dive right in to those two back-to-back victories. Because, of course, the last time we talked, Maryland was coming off back-to-back losses. They went out west. They lost to Oregon. They lost to Washington. They came back from that road trip a disappointing 1-3. And one of the things that I talked about coming out of that stretch was I really wanted to see how Jacoby Gillespie would respond. Would he be the guy that we had seen all year leading up to that road trip where he had his worst game of the season against Washington and then he had a much better game against Oregon, but I felt like made some critical mistakes down the stretch in that game with some decision making, with a missed free throw. So that was something I was really wanting to see going into that UCLA game and then following up with that Minnesota game. And I'm going to talk about both these games kind of in conjunction at this point because, you know, there's been two. The UCLA game was huge when it happened, but now we're a game past that. They won another against Minnesota. I'm going to talk about both these games in conjunction with one another. And the resounding answer to my question about Jacoby Gillespie and what we would see from him and if he would be that guy we had seen leading up to that road trip, the resounding answer to that question was absolutely from Jacoby Gillespie. Because Gillespie goes out against UCLA, he puts up a cool 27, including 9 of 9 from the charity stripe, 4 of 8 from beyond the arc, 4 assists in that game as well. And then against Minnesota, in a game where Maryland was really slow all night, really never found a rhythm throughout much of the night, Jacoby Gillespie went out and he put up 15. So I thought we got a resounding yes about Jacoby Gillespie and what he can be and what he will continue to be the rest of the season for the Terps. I don't think, if you're a Maryland fan, if you're Kevin Willard, I don't think you could have asked for much more from Gillespie coming out of that road trip with the kind of response that you got from him. And I really thought he set the tone against UCLA. He was a guy who was hitting big shots when he needed to. He was making plays when he needed to. He did everything that you could possibly ask of him. And it's time to start really thinking about where Jacoby Gillespie fits in the league and fits within the country, because I think I can make a case that Jacoby Gillespie is looking like a guy that could be first team all Big Ten. I think I could make a case that Jacoby Gillespie is a guy that is maybe, I'm not going to say give him the nod quite yet over Braden Smith, because I think Braden Smith has earned that over 3 years in the Big Ten. He's earned that benefit of the doubt. But I think when you look around this league, Braden Smith I would put ahead of him. But who else are you automatically putting ahead of Jacoby Gillespie when it comes to guards? And we all know this is a guards game. It's a guards sport. So if you have one of the best guards in your conference, and of course, that goes along with a couple of the best big men in the conference, you are going to be very well positioned to win a lot of games. And I think that's how we really need to start talking about Jacoby Gillespie at this point in the season, at this point in his Maryland career. And if you don't believe me, you don't believe my eyes, you maybe don't believe your own eyes, let's go to some stats. Let's go to some objective stats. And Evan Maya, one of my favorite websites for player ratings, has Jacoby Gillespie as the number 10 player in the country, the number 10 BPR. And just to give you some context, so you're not like, okay, well, what's Evan Maya? Well, who else does he have in this top 10? Well, Janai Broom's number 1 and Cooper Flagg's number 2. Cam Jones is number 3. Joseph Tugler from Houston, number 4. Hunter Dickinson, number 5. Zakai Ziegler from Tennessee, number 6. Braden Smith, number 7. Cameron Matthews from Mississippi State, number 8. Darian Williams at Texas Tech, number 9, and then Jacoby Gillespie at number 10. I don't think anybody would argue that Janai Broom and Cooper Flagg are the two best players in the country right now. I think you'd have a very easy argument to make that Cam Jones, who we all saw as Maryland fans play in person against the Terps, is one of the top 5 players in the country. We know over years and years what Hunter Dickinson can bring to the table, both from his time at Michigan and at Kansas. Those are guys that I think everybody around the country says, yeah, that's a legit top 5. Well, Jacoby Gillespie is right there on that list at number 10. So that's how I think we have to start thinking about Jacoby Gillespie. He is a guy who can go off on any given night for 20 plus. When you need him to score, you can rely on him. And when you need him to run your offense, I think you can rely on him too. He's not a guy that puts up like these monster assist totals, but against Minnesota last night, he did put up 7 assists to 2 turnovers. And I felt like, especially in the second half, he was doing a really good job of getting Derek Queen the ball and getting Derek Queen the ball in spots where Derek Queen likes the ball. So big shout out to Jacoby Gillespie. And I feel like that's the kind of player we need to start thinking of Jacoby Gillespie as a guy who can take over a game, a guy who can be the best player on a really good team. I don't know who the best player on this Maryland team is right now, to be perfectly honest. It could be Jacoby Gillespie. It could be Derek Queen. It could be Julian Reese. There's a lot of options, and I've said it time and time again. That's what I like so much about this Maryland team as this season has gone on, is that you never know who's going to hit the big shot, that you never know who's going to step up. And I thought Jacoby Gillespie, coming off a really bad game against Washington, coming off a game against Oregon, which left a lot to be desired down the stretch, I was extraordinarily impressed with the way he played against UCLA, in how he scored in that game, and then coming back against Minnesota and the way he was distributing the ball. And he scored 15, but really the way he was running that team last night, the way he was the floor general, to use a cliche. So that's how I am starting to think about Jacoby Gillespie, as one of the best guards in the Big Ten, one of the best guards in the country, and I could not have been more satisfied with his response after a tough road trip over these last 2 games. And that's kind of the good that I'm taking away from these 2 games. There's a lot of good to take away when you win back-to-back games, when you get back to 500 in the conference. So another piece of good that I am taking out of this is the play of Tafara Gapare. And he is a guy. He is, let's use all the cliches in the book. He's the ultimate energy guy. He's the ultimate spark plug. What else? Glue. He's the ultimate glue guy. And one play last night really stood out to me. And Maryland, and we're going to get to the bad and the ugly here in a second, because there was some bad, there was some ugly. But when you go 2-0, there's a lot of good. Maryland was in a slog against Minnesota last night. It was in a slugfest. And with the game tied at 46, with about 13 minutes to go, Tafara Gapare came up with a huge block that ultimately led to a Jacoby Gillespie 3, which gave Maryland the 49-46 lead. And that felt like a turning point in the game. And it feels like Gapare has these plays every game, especially on the defensive end, especially the way he's able to protect the rim, that have the ability to change a game, that have the ability to swing momentum. And I'm sure I've talked about it on this show before. If you've missed me talking about it, or if maybe I haven't talked about it quite as much as I thought I believe in something that I call the college football avalanche. Again, and I think it applies very well to college basketball as well. there's these little plays in a college football or college basketball game, and I think it particularly applies to college with the emotion of the game, with the way the crowd can be so involved, with when you're dealing with players who are not pros, who are more inexperienced, who maybe ride those ups and downs a little bit more. There are plays in games at the college level that can drastically swing things in one direction or another. And sometimes they get this avalanche rolling. One block leads to 1-3, leads to another turnover, leads to ultimately a 10-0 run. The ball game's over. You go on to win by 20. That kind of thing happens all the time in college basketball. It happens in college football too, but this is a Maryland basketball show. This is a college basketball show. I'm going to stick to that right now. Tafara Gapari has the ability to get the avalanche rolling. A block like that can get the avalanche rolling and really change the whole trajectory. It's a hard word to say, I guess. He can really change the whole trajectory of a game. So I've been really impressed with Tafara Gapare. His numbers are never going to pop out at you on the stat line. Looking at the stat sheet against UCLA, he goes 14 minutes, 8 points, which is a lot of points for him. 2 blocks, 2 rebounds. Nothing eye-popping there, right? Last night against Minnesota, 15 minutes, 2 points, 2 blocks, a rebound. Nothing eye-popping. But those little plays, those 2 blocks in a game, when what ultimately leads to a 3 or leads to a run-out dunk can be really huge and can get that momentum rolling, can get that avalanche rolling. And I think it's particularly important that we've seen something from Gapare. We've seen his ability. We've seen his ability to do things like that because it seems like more and more, although they're both in the starting lineup together, Julian Reese and Derek Queen are starting to spend a little bit more time apart when they play. We've seen a lot of lineups with Reese and Gapare. We've seen a lot of lineups with Queen and Gapare. The key guy there, the key word, the operative word is Gapare. Kevin Willard clearly trusts him as the third big, and I do think there are advantages to playing both of them at the same time, but I think there are some advantages to separating them as well. One, it's really hard for a college basketball team for 40 minutes to have to defend one of those guys at all time. So I think that's a huge advantage to keep one of them fresh, let one guy go to work, then their other team's getting worn down a little bit. Oh, great. You were dealing with Julian Reese. Here's Derek Queen. I think there can be an advantage in that. I also think there can be advantages when you're playing them both together. But clearly, Kevin Willard has found that there are times he likes to play them apart, and Tafara Gapare is always the guy who is with one of them. And so the fact that he is making plays like that, he is coming up with those big blocks, he can start that avalanche rolling, I think is really, really important and very encouraging about what this team can be the rest of the way. Gapare is a guy who is not going to show up on the stat sheet all that much, but he's critically important to this basketball team. And I thought that was a moment against Minnesota last night that really exemplifies what he's all about. And my last piece of good that I'll end with here will continue to be the play of Julian Reese, Derek Queen, and how you cannot, on any given night, hold both of them down. And these 2 games were a great example because the UCLA game was the Julian Reese game. The Minnesota game was the Derek Queen game. Against UCLA, Julian Reese goes 7 of 8 from the field for 16 points. Queen only had 8 points in that game. But Julian Reese, I thought he was the difference in that game. That was a game for Maryland where they could not quite pull away the whole time. And Reese and UCLA's best scorer, Tyler Bilodeau, they were going at it down the stretch. And I thought Reese, there was a few plays in the second half, Bilodeau got the better of him. Reese came right back and got the better of Bilodeau. And of course, the Mick Cronin technical late in that game with about 5 minutes left, I think that is ultimately, you want to talk about an avalanche, that's what sent the avalanche rolling in that one, because that was not an 18-point game throughout. That was a 7, 8, 9-point game throughout where it felt like Maryland had the possibility to pull away, but couldn't quite do it. That Mick Cronin double technical with 5 minutes left really set things off. And if you listen to the show, the preview show, you'll know what he said about his team. You know how desperate I feel like that team felt. And Mick Cronin's team now after losing to Rutgers as well, on Monday, 2-4 in conference. They got a lot of soul searching to do in UCLA. The Bruins got a lot to figure out the rest of the season as they came into the year as one of the Big Ten favorites. But the point is, on any given night, you might be able to stop one. You're not going to be able to stop both. And then last night I thought was a great example as well, because Julian Reese scores just 4 points. Derek Queen, 27 points. And Derek Queen was unbelievable last night, especially in the second half. And in the first half, I was critical. I was critical of this team and what it looked like, because I did not think they were getting enough paint touches. And they were struggling with a Minnesota team that is not, let's just be blunt, is not a very good Minnesota team. It's a Minnesota team that's now 0-6 in conference play. It's a Minnesota team that is not going to make the NCAA tournament. I doubt they're going to make any sort of postseason this season. It's a team that Maryland, it would have been nice to see them blow out. And they were struggling with that team in the first half. And I'm going to get to some of the reasons why here in just a moment. But Derek Queen comes up with 27 points. At halftime of that game, and I'm looking for the exact number here because I tweeted it out. And the way Twitter works, Lord help all of us. It's like, shouldn't be that hard to find something that you tweeted out yourself just the night before. But alas, that's Twitter. But here we go. With under 8 minutes left in the first half. Nope, still not it. Okay. At halftime, just 6 combined points on 3 of 7 shooting for the Julian Reese Derek Queen duo. Just 6 combined points on 7 shots. And I did not think Maryland was getting those guys enough touches. I didn't think they were getting them the ball. And it's something they've struggled with that I felt like at times throughout the years. How do you get those guys the ball? And with Derek Queen, he's not always a guy where you can only get him the ball on the block. It's not like he's a guy that says, hey, I like this spot on the left block or the right block. I need it there, and then I can go to work. The beauty of Derek Queen is that he's so versatile. You can get it to him in a million different ways. Yeah, he can go to work on the block, but yeah, he can also catch the ball on the elbow and face up and go to work. There are a lot of different things you can do with Derek Queen, and I thought Derek Queen and Maryland did a really good job of making sure Queen got those touches, and they weren't always on the low block. Sometimes they were at the elbow and he was facing up. Sometimes they were on the block. Maryland made a concerted effort to get Derek Queen the ball, and it paid off because he finished with 27 points in this game while Reese had just 4. You can't stop both of those guys on any given night, and that is what makes this Maryland team so effective. Is yes, one night you might be able to take away Derek Queen. You still have Julian Reese to deal with. You might be able to take away Julian Reese. You still have Derek Queen to deal with. And what if in some way, shape, or form you ever were able to take away both of those guys? Then you still have Jacoby Gillespie, who by some metrics is one of the top 10 players in the country, one of the top guards in the Big Ten, if not the country. That's why I continue, even as this team has shown signs of weakness, to be superbly confident and high on this team. To feel like this is a team that is a no doubt about it tournament team, and a team that really does feel like it can do some damage in the NCAA tournament. I said it once, I'll say it again, I'll probably say it a million times before this season is done, unless things drastically change. But at this moment right now, I continue to believe this is the Maryland team best equipped to make a real run in March. And by that I mean the second weekend, the Sweet 16 or beyond, since the 2011 Maryland team that lost to Michigan State in the second round. I'm sorry, 2011 is incorrect. Since the 2010 Maryland team that lost to Michigan State in the second round. I think this team is better equipped than the 2020 team that didn't have the tournament played. I think it's better equipped than the 2019 team that lost to LSU in the second round. I think it's better equipped than any Mark Turgeon team. I think it is better equipped to make a real run in March than any Maryland team since the 2010 team led by Gravis Vasquez that had its heart absolutely ripped out by Michigan State in the second round against Corey Lucius. That is how I feel about this basketball team right now. Now, that was a lot of good right there, and deservedly so. They came off a tough road trip. They got things together. They won 2 big games, and they're sitting at 3-3 in the conference. They're back to 500. They're number 23 in the net. They're building a tournament resume, and unfortunately, with some things kind of outside of their control, some of their quad 1 wins have turned to quad 2 wins. But either way, Maryland should be happy coming off those 2 wins. But let's talk about the bad. Let's talk about what didn't go well. And what I thought was bad in these 2 games was there was a certain level of inconsistency that we saw. This was a far cry, despite what the UCLA score says, despite the fact that it says it was an 18-point game. That game was not one where you felt like Maryland really has this in the bag throughout. There was moments where Maryland was up 8, where Maryland was up 9, and they couldn't quite put it away. It took that Mick Cronin technical to really put it away. And that's something, as you're looking to develop into, go from a good to great team, that's the kind of stuff that really matters, I think. Because sometimes you let a team hang around, and if that team is good enough, they're going to make you pay for it. And I felt like Maryland did a lot of letting UCLA hang around throughout that basketball game. It never felt like a super crisp performance to me in that game. And Mick Cronin helped with those double technicals. They really did take advantage of that. That was a positive. But I thought there was a lot of inconsistency in that win over UCLA. And then you come into the Minnesota game. And the Minnesota game, and I tweeted it out yesterday. You can find me on Twitter, on Blue Sky, on Instagram, TikTok, all the social media platforms, the same handle, @Gorgon Sports. I put this on Twitter yesterday, that the combination of Maryland squaring off against a bad team in Minnesota with an early start time, with coming off a big win against UCLA with just a couple days rest, that it felt like a tailor-made recipe for a slow start by the Terps. And it was. It was a slow start by the Terps. Maryland trailed Minnesota, a winless team in conference, 35-32 at halftime. That, by all definitions, is a slow start for the Terps. I already mentioned the stat, 6 combined points on 3 of 7 for shooting for the Reese-Queen duo in the first half. When you look at BartTorvik.com, one of my favorite things to look at on that website, you go to the Maryland page, he has a game score for every game. 100 is the best, the lower is the worst. This Minnesota game score was a 67. Maryland's other worst performance, Maryland's only had 2 performances worse than that this season. Washington, the loss to Washington was a 61, and the win over Maryland Eastern Shore, a 15-point win after a full week off around Christmas, was a 41. Most of Maryland's other games have been in the high 80s or low 90s. Maryland's had a very good season for by all advanced metrics. They've had a very good season. But Maryland was a 67 in this game. Not good at all. And I thought it was a tailor-made recipe for a slow start, and that's really what we saw. The thing that I take away as bad out of this, and Dawson Garcia is a very good big man for Minnesota. He's a guy who has been around there for a while. I've always been very impressed with his play. He had 21 points in the win yesterday, but the thing that I take away as bad is I felt like at times, especially in that first half, Minnesota was doing the little things, doing the hustle things better than Maryland. The offensive glass is one area that comes to mind. You know, you look at the numbers, it only ends up being 8-6 in terms of offensive rebounds in Minnesota's favor, but it didn't feel like there was a time the ball was going up by the Gophers where it was easy for Maryland to get a rebound. So I give Minnesota a lot of credit for that, for still doing those things as a bad team on the road, something that's pretty hard to do. But that was something that was concerning for me, and it goes to that inconsistency I was talking about. Inconsistent within the UCLA game, and then inconsistent, little lax to start this Minnesota game. Now, ultimately, they do turn it around, they get the win, and the win is what matters. But there are some things, like there are things within those 2 games. If you can't bring that energy, if you can't bring that juice, which I praise them for doing against Syracuse, then there's going to be a time where you are going to be in trouble. Now, part of not being able to bring the juice goes to what I want to get to today with the ugly. And the ugly, Maryland fans, was the home crowd for that Minnesota game. The home crowd for the Minnesota game was terrible. There was absolutely no home court advantage in Xfinity Center on Monday night. And I know there are a lot of reasons for that. I know there are a lot of excuses for that. And let me list them all off preemptively. It was a 6:30 game, which is very hard to get to. Traffic in the area makes it really hard to get to a 6:30 game. I totally get it. I did it myself. I drove there. It's not fun. I get it. Look, I understand. 6:30 games are really hard, but that's number one. Got that. Students are on winter break, okay? That's something that every school in the country is dealing with as well, but the students were on winter break. Third, you're going to say probably Minnesota's not a very good team. And what I'm going to say in response to all of that, and officially there were 10,271 people in attendance at Xfinity Center versus Minnesota. Against UCLA, it was a little better, and it felt a lot better. It was over 15,000 people there. But just for comparison's sake, against Mount St. Mary's, there was 11,726 people. So more people attended the Mount St. Mary's game than the Minnesota game. Officially, anyway. This game right here that I brought up, Alcorn State, 10,000 people, just over 10,000 people attended the Alcorn State game. So basically the same number of people, a few more, a couple hundred more, attended the Minnesota game than the Alcorn State game. The crowd was bad. The crowd was bad. The crowd was lackluster. The crowd did not help Maryland in this game. And it's critically important, y'all. I'm not here to tell anybody how to spend their money, how to spend their time, lecture you on why you need to go to a basketball game in College Park. You're going to do whatever you're going to do. And if you're listening to me, I'm probably just preaching to the choir. Because if you are listening to this podcast, you're probably going to these games anyway. And look, I know things come up. I do not have an 100% attendance record at all home games. I certainly do not. I get it. I get that things come up. I get you can't make it to every game. I get that there are more important things in life sometimes than Maryland basketball. I'm just going to say this. Maryland has struggled greatly away from Xfinity Center in the Kevin Willard era. Over 2 full seasons plus change now into this 2025 season, Maryland is a combined 4-19 in road games. That's 1-9 in 2023, 3-7 last year, and 0-3 in 2025. 4-19 in road games. Home teams traditionally in the Big Ten have a massive advantage. Just this year in Big Ten play, home teams have won over 63% of games. Last year, home teams won over 68% of conference games. Home teams have a massive advantage in the Big Ten. And when that building is full, when that building is packed, when that building gets going, the way we know it can, the way it did against Marquette, the way it did against Duke and North Carolina for all of those years, the way that it has for certain games that come to mind, like that Georgetown game, that one-off Georgetown game years back, some of the Michigan State games in that building, sometimes against Wisconsin, there's been really great crowds. When that building gets going, it is as good as any in the country. Nearly 18,000 people. It's a huge building. It's intimidating. The way the students surround the court and the wall, it's an intimidating building. It's a tough place to play, but it's not a tough place to play when it's basically half full. And this team needs that boost because it's hard to go and win on the road in the Big Ten. Under Kevin Willard, Maryland hasn't done it a whole lot. Maryland's going to need to win at home. Maryland's going to need every advantage they can get at home if they want to get where they want to get to. And plus, I would just say, if you are a Maryland fan, if you love Maryland basketball, you love this team, you gotta love this team. You really do. This is a team that I've said it again and again and again. It's a team that I've absolutely fallen in love with, that I feel is as good as any that we've seen in Maryland in the last 15 years. Now, granted, we haven't seen vintage Maryland basketball in the last 15 years. But Derek Queen is a guy who's a no doubt about it pro. Julian Reese is a guy who has busted his hump for 4 years at Maryland. He's been through coaching changes. He's had assistant coaches leave. He's had every opportunity, I'm sure, to get in the transfer portal and leave. And he's stayed at Maryland for 4 years. He's given it everything. He's a guy that you can certainly root for and say, if you're somebody that says, I just don't know, the current state of college sports, everybody's leaving, there's no loyalty to the school, it's not the same for me as it once was, look at Julian Reese as an example of somebody who clearly loves this university, who clearly loves this team. If you love basketball, you gotta love watching Derek Queen. One of the smartest basketball players, highest basketball IQs I've ever seen step foot on the Xfinity Center floor. I have not seen many players with the basketball IQ that Derek Queen has, especially as a freshman. And then you have these guys like a Tafar Gapari, who's the ultimate spark plug, like a Rodney Rice, who really, truly, in what amounts to his first year of playing college basketball, has been an aberration, a guy who can knock it down from anywhere. And then the point guard, Jacoby Gillespie, is a guy who is very possibly one of the best guards in the country. Maryland needs every fan to get in that building and fill it up and make it a tough place to play. Because this team has a ton of potential, and they're going to have to go win games on the road. Don't get me wrong. If you are a good team, you go out and win on the road. But this team deserves every opportunity to have every single advantage at home. So that's my ugly. 10,000 people for a conference game against Minnesota. I get the excuses. I get the early start time. I get the opponent. I get that the students are on spring break. I would implore, I would beg every Maryland fan out there to get there on Sunday against Nebraska when they take on the Cornhuskers. Later in the month, they have Wisconsin, a fun Wisconsin team, a Wisconsin team that actually gets up and down the floor. This isn't your older brother's Wisconsin. Go and watch Maryland take on Wisconsin in late January. That's going to be a great game. Rutgers comes to town in February. Rutgers, not a great team. They have 2 5-stars on that team, though. They have a couple guys you're probably going to be seeing playing in the NBA at some point. Maryland has to, as a team, go on the road and get wins, right? That's how you become a great team. That's how you build a resume. But it's hard. If Maryland, I would say, and Maryland now sits at 0-3 when it comes to road games in the Big Ten. So 7 games left. If Maryland could get 3 road wins, if they could go 3-4 the rest of the way, I honestly think that would be a win. So you look at it that way. Let's say Maryland can get 3 wins on the road. That puts Maryland at 6 Big Ten wins. That means with the remaining 7 home games, if they could go 7-0 in those games, they could be 13-7 in the Big Ten. That's not going to win you the Big Ten, but that's going to get you a very good seed in the NCAA tournament, depending on who you beat. It's certainly enough to get you in. It's probably going to get you a seed that you can win with as well. So I would implore you, I would beg you, if you're a Terps fan, if you like this team, there's a million reasons to like this team. Get out there, make Xfinity Center a raucous place to play, because it can be one of the best in the country. It has the potential to be one of the best in the country. If you want to be Kansas, if you want to be Kentucky, then you have to act like Kansas and you have to act like Kentucky. And I can tell you this much, I've covered the Big 12. At Allen Fieldhouse, the place isn't half full for a Big 12 game. Allen Fieldhouse, I don't know the capacity of it offhand. I'll look it up for you here real quickly. Just over 1,600. There are not games in the Big 12. There are not times where you have somebody who's a bad Big 12 team. Who's a bad Big 12 team right now? There are not times where Oklahoma State is coming to town and there are only 8,000 people in Allen Fieldhouse. So if you want to be Kansas, act like Kansas. Xfinity Center can be one of the toughest places to play in the country. Let's make it that way. So I'll get off my soapbox there now. That was my ugly. It was the crowd against Minnesota on a Monday night. We got to do better, Terps fans. I know you can do better. I know we can do better. I've seen it better. It's a great place to play when it's filled up, and it can really make a big advantage, really make a big difference for this team. Next up for the Terps is Northwestern on Thursday night on the road. A really big chance to get one of those road wins, one of those highly coveted road wins that are few and far between. Northwestern has lost 3 in a row in the Big Ten. They're 1-4. This is a desperate team. You talk about a team that's desperate. Northwestern is a desperate team. Now, their weakness, the thing they haven't done well this year is shoot the ball well from beyond the arc. Very reminiscent of how Maryland was last year. 31.5% from beyond the arc as a team against Minnesota, who they just fell to over the weekend at home. Shot the ball very poorly. 5 of 25, just 20% from beyond the arc. That's really the key for this team. If Maryland lets Northwestern go off, if they let them shoot 40%, it's going to be tough. If they can hold them down from beyond the arc, if they can force them into bad shots and they're shooting something like 25, 30%, I think Maryland should have a great chance to win this game. After that, Maryland has Nebraska at home on a Sunday. Nebraska, a team that has really been a lot better recently under Fred Hoiberg. They are coming off back-to-back road losses. Close one against Iowa in overtime, and then they get absolutely blown out by Purdue. Mackey, just one of the toughest places to play in all of college basketball. But they're a team that's 2-3 in the Big Ten. They're a team that made the NCAA tournament last year, and as of this moment, their resume is not there yet. They have a win over Creighton. They have a win over UCLA. But they're a team that certainly has tournament aspirations. That's going to be a really big one for the Terps. I will be back to break down and react to both of those games sometime next week. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you hanging out with me. And until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.